Hello. Oh, there we go. I'll be back in about 10 years. Alright, so basically the, oops, this is the Chess Master program that I'm using. I primarily use this program to study openings. Actually, as a matter of fact, let me Basic tactics. Basic openings. Basic opening ideas. Listen to that fucking bird. That bird. Just shut up. Shut up. I'm talking now. You can shut up. You've been shut up all night. Now you're starting to blabber. Alright. I'm going to try to get through this as quickly and painlessly as possible. This is from Chessmaster 10. Yeah. Let's see if we could get through this.
Welcome to the world of chess tactics. Our next step is to build you an arsenal of...
Oh, that's a little bit loud.
Welcome to the world of chess tactics. Our next step is to build you an arsenal of tactical weapons with which you can take on the savviest of opponents. During this part of the academy, you'll learn how to use your pieces in coordinated attack. We'll focus on the most fundamental tactical devices: forks, skewers, pins, removing the defender, and discovered attacks. Each theme we explore will at once make sense right away and possess countless layers of subtlety which you can unearth as you learn more and more about chess. It's important to realize that these very weapons are used by the world's greatest chess players in every game they play. Now you're speaking the language of the masters. The first component of our arsenal is called forks. We saw this weapon briefly in part 1. The fork is the most basic weapon in chess, and it's used at every level of play. You can envision it as a fork in the road, a branching of possibilities. Whenever one piece attacks two other pieces, it's a fork. As this course progresses, we'll see numerous examples of double attacks. The fork is the most basic and essential manifestation. In general, the more valuable the other two pieces, the more powerful the fork. In this position, the white knight forks the black king and queen. This is a royal fork, and the strongest of all possibilities. In general, the more valuable the other two pieces, the more powerful the fork. In this section, we're going to focus on knight forks, because this is the hardest piece to get used to. But first, let's look at some basic forks, where other pieces do the damage.
Alright, so I've noticed there's been some mistakes in here. Now, you remember where he said that attacking the queen and the king was a royal fork? That is not true. A royal fork is where the knight attacks the king, the queen, and a rook. It's attacking three pieces at the same time, and it's the queen and the rook makes up the royal fork. And I should look that up just to verify that because I'm curious. A fork of king and queen. I always thought it was the queen, king, queen, and a rook. Well, I don't know. I guess it doesn't really matter. We're just learning the basics of this game anyway. Just let it go through.
In this position, white isn't check but can turn the tables on black. What is white's best move?
What? I gotta play this? I was gonna check my own king. Well, let's see. Oh, the king can attack two pieces.
That's right. King e4 forks the black knight and rook, and they cannot defend each other. You see, the king can be a weapon too. In fact, towards the end of the game, we often use the king actively like this. In the beginning of a chess game, we want to defend our king, keep him safe, but when the board empties and there's less danger, he becomes a powerful piece that should be used actively. Do you see any forks for white here?
Well, that's a skewer. There's a skewer where the bishop... Oh, that's a dark bishop. Okay.
You got it. Here, c4 forks the knight and rook. It's black to move here. Do you see any forks?
Well, that's technically a fork, even though it's attacking, but that wouldn't be any good because white could attack back. Let's try this move.
Well done. Bishop e3 check wins the white rook. Do you see any forks for black here?
Oh, right there. Sometimes it's not always looking for it to put the king in check.
Very good. Rook h5 forks the bishop and knight. This example shows how powerful a rook can be on an open board, forking pieces on opposite sides. Here, white can win the black rook with a queen fork, but there are two right ways and two wrong ways. Be careful. What's white's best move? Very good. One of the two right moves is queen d5 check, winning the rook. The queen is a very powerful attacker and can be devastating with long-range forks. Do you see the other one? That's right. One of the two right moves is queen a2 check, winning the rook. The queen is a very powerful attacker and can be devastating with long-range forks. The other fork which would win the rook is queen d5 check. This next position is similar to the last one, but with a wrinkle. Here black has one way to win the white rook, but there are three tempting but wrong tries. Take your time with this one. Find the best move. Very good. The solution is queen a7 check, operating on a long diagonal and a long file to win the rook. In this exercise, click on every square where the black queen can attack two or more white pieces without getting captured. Be careful. Now let's spend some time examining knight forks, a weapon you'll want to have at your fingertips. How can white win a piece here? Very good. Knight c3 check, forking the king and bishop.
I was talking.
In this exercise, click on every square where the
You
white
didn't miss
knight can
anything.
fork two black pieces. Now click on every square where a white knight could fork two black pieces without getting captured. In the middle game and opening, knight forks often take place on the f7 square, like in this position. Here the white knight forks the black queen and rook. One way this type of fork can arise is in an opening that I used to play when I was a kid, called the fried liver. From the beginning I play e4, my opponents would play e5, you usually want to develop a pawn into the center of the board in the beginning. Then you want to develop a central knight. I played knight f3 attacking his e-pawn, my opponents would play knight c6 defending. Then I'd play bishop c4. Notice how I'm developing my pieces into the center of the board, and I'm preparing my king to castle, into safety. My opponents would play knight f6, and now I would play the move knight g5. A lot of the time they'd play a move like d6 here. Now, what's white's best move? Good job. Here you can play the fork that I showed you above. Knight takes f7, forks the queen, and rook. You see, the bishop on c4 defends the knight, so the black king can't capture it. After knight takes f7, black should move the more valuable piece out of the attack, with queen e7. And white plays knight takes h8, and has won a rook. I can't tell you how many games I won with this trap as a 6 and 7-year-old boy, but I didn't show you this opening for you to memorize it and try to start winning chess games fast. Memorizing opening traps is the wrong way to study chess, because then we're not learning the heart of the game. The reason I showed you this opening is because I want you to see how patterns we work on with just a few pieces on the board can be repeated in much more complicated situations. So as this course goes along, just try to get a feeling for the essence of each tactical and strategical device I show you. These are the principles of chess, and they can be applied to any situation. The key is to learn the basics in a more simplified atmosphere so we can focus on what's essential. What should white play here? Find the best move.
There's a knight fork with the king and the bishop. However, the rook is more valuable.
Well done. Knight c5 check. Well, here we see the white has two forks, knight c5 check and knight d4 check. We know that a rook is worth 5 pawns and a bishop is only worth 3 pawns, so let's win the rook. In chess, you'll often see a good move, then maybe a slightly better move. But take your time. Find the best move. What is white's best fork here?
Well, he can't play the knight, that other square, because the knight captures it, so he's got to go. The only one that's left is here.
Very good. White's best move is knight e5 check, winning a pawn. Again, we see two possibilities, knight c5 and knight e5. This question is a little tricky because I don't want you to automatically fork the strongest piece at all times. Here, knight c5 check would be a mistake because the forked knight can simply capture the forker. Knight takes c5.
Hit the forker.
Remember, anytime a knight attacks another knight, the attack is mutual.
Good night.
It's important as I teach you attacking themes for you to consider the other side of the coin. We need to develop our arsenal while consistently learning how to disarm the opponent. This position is a little different from the ones we've seen so far. Here white is forking black's rook and bishop. Do you see any way for black to avoid losing material?
There's no checks. That's the first thing I look. That's the first thing I look for is a check to get out of it. He can protect. He can move the rook and protect the bishop. Actually, there's only one square to do that with.
That's right. Black can defend with rook a6. So after knight takes d6, he can recapture rook takes d6, and we know that bishops and knights are both worth approximately 3 pawns, so no material was lost or won.
Well, the bishop was worth a lot more.
Whenever you fork, you want to find the most forcing alternative, so your opponent cannot defend. For example, take a look at the next position. Here white has 2 possible forks. What's the best move?
Well, if he attacks the 2 rooks, the rooks can defend each other. Whereas if he attacks the 1 rook, he can get that rook off the board with the check.
Well done. Clearly knight b3 check is most forcing, and wins a rook outright. But what happens after the mistake, knight c6? White is forking the 2 black rooks. What should black play here? Well, there are a few ways to avoid losing a whole rook. First of all, either rook could move to a8 or d5 and defend the other one, so black would only lose the exchange, knight for rook, the equivalent of about 2 pawns. In chess, we call the trade-off of rook for bishop or rook for knight the exchange, so if you win a rook for a bishop, you've won the exchange. If you lose, for example, a rook for a knight, you've lost the exchange.
And if you go back to that position, he could have played check, number 1, and then moved the other rook, and he wouldn't have lost either rook. So what's going on here?
But black has a better move after knight c6. Look for the most forcing escape.
Yeah.
Good work. Rook h8 check. Get out of attack with tempo. You see, if the rook is checking the king, white is forced to move out of the way. This type of forcing response is an in-between move is called with tempo. White has to move the king, after which black can move the a5 rook and have gotten out of danger completely. So on both attack and defense, you want to minimize your opponent's chances by finding the most forcing alternative. Okay, this problem might be a little tough because it uses a combination to set up a fork. You haven't yet learned the main idea that the combination is based on. It's coming up next, so don't worry if you have trouble. But try to solve it. It's good to stretch the mind. Here white can set up a powerful fork. Take your time and see if you find the combination. Click next when you see the move.
Well, the idea would be to get the rook behind the king so that he could put him in check and take the queen after. Okay, this is called a deflection. Now, so if the rook does go down there and puts him in check, the king can take the rook, after which the knight has a fork here with, and the knight can capture the queen. So that's winning. That's winning because he's got a knight on the board. If the rook goes down here and the king does not capture, the king has to move. If the king moves off the rank, then the rook's going to capture the queen, and that's even worse. So this is the best. This is a deflection. So it deflects the king. What's going on here? What? Click next when you see the move.
The correct move is rook e8 check, sacrificing the rook to set up a fork. A sacrifice, sometimes called a sack by chess players, is when you give up material to gain down the road. You see, if the black king moves out of check, the rook can capture the queen.
It's also called a
This is called a skewer and looks like an X-ray attack on the queen. You've already seen this.
That's a skewer.
Black's only choice is king takes e8. And now I'm sure you see the fork. Knight c7 check wins the queen. After you finish this course, you'll have no problem spotting combinations like these. But first we have to internalize the building blocks. Now let's learn about pins and skewers.
Yeah, I didn't say anything about a skewer yet.
So you've already seen an example of the skewer in the last problem of the fork section. Pins and skewers are both versions of an X-ray attack, where the attacker has two defenders piled up in its line of fire. A skewer is more forcing because the more valuable piece is attacked first, and when it moves, the less valuable piece can be captured. For example, take a look at this position. Here, white can play rook h8 check, and when the black king moves to g7, f7, or e7, rook takes a8 wins the queen. This is a decisive skewer. A pin, in contrast, is when the less valuable piece is attacked first, but is pinned to its square because if it moves, the more valuable piece would fall. For example here, the black knight is pinned and can't move, because then the king would come under attack, so black is paralyzed and will lose the knight. It's important to realize that only bishops, rooks, and queens can pin or skewer, because they are the only long-distance operators. Let's start off working on some skewers. It's black to move here. Find the skewer.
That's pretty obvious.
That's right. Bishop g2 check skewers the king to the queen. Now it's white to move. Find the skewer.
Yeah, that works. Wait a minute. Is that the best move? Yeah, that's probably the best move.
Very good. Here white can play rook e3. The rook is defended by the f2 pawn, so after queen takes e3, f takes e3, white has won a queen for a rook. There's no way for the black queen to move to a square that defends her rook, because the a4 square is guarded by the white queen. White to move here. Do you see the skewer?
Not really. Huh. Oh, wait a minute. Well, I can see where the queen can attack the king. But that's not a skewer. I don't believe. That's the only move I can see is that. I'm not sure what it is. But that's not a skewer. Well, I don't know what it's skewering. I'll just play this move and see what happens here.
No, that's not quite right. Try again.
Yeah, no kidding. There's no skewer that I can see. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I see it now. See, you gotta look at the whole board. It's like it's there, you know.
Very good. Queen h6 check. Here you can really see the power of combining the queen's diagonal and horizontal powers. She can slice through the enemy pawn structure to move to the h-file to win the black rook all the way on the a-file. Here black has to decide whether or not to trade queens. Do you see how to set up a skewer? Usually in chess games our opponents don't just serve us up positions where we can use tactics to beat them. We have to prepare them. Take a look. Black to move.
Oh, it's black to move? He could trade queens or do a skewer. Well, if there's a skewer involved. If he puts the rook on that file, and the queen takes the rook for free, what does the queen have? No, wait, it's black to move. Black is preparing. So in other words, well, yeah, of course, black captures queen. And then there's a skewer right after with the rook coming over.
That's right. It turns out that by trading queens, black can win a rook. After queen takes f5 check, King takes f5, rook f8 check wins a rook. Now that you know about skewers, your alarm bell should always go off when you notice pieces lined up on the same diagonal, rank, or file. This is how the chess intuition works. We learn patterns and then instinctively put them together.
That's what I was just going to say.
This last one is a little tricky. It's okay if you can't get it, but I want you to try for a few minutes. Try to combine some of the ideas we've been talking about. It's white to move here. Any ideas?
It's the whole idea of recognizing patterns. Like you could say, okay, well, there's an end goal. If I could get a piece to that spot, I could win a piece. But how do I get there? Is there something like, do I have to deflect something? Do I have to move a piece? Do I have to capture a piece to get it out of the way? How do I make it so that I can get my piece to skewer another piece or use that tactic if something is in the way? That's basically deflection. You're deflecting the piece away so that you can do your attack. Alright, so here there's a fork between the knight and the king. White to move. So, but he can't do it because the pawn is going to attack there. And how can he get rid of the pawn? He can skewer. He could actually capture the pawn by skewering skewering the king. He can grab the pawn for free, but that loses the knight. And that's going to make it a draw. Oh, I see what it is now. White has a chance to win the queen. So basically, he can get a knight for free, pawn for free. But what if the queen puts the king in constant check? And that would try to force a draw. So he can win a pawn. And the king can march over behind the king here. Maybe like the king could walk over towards the queen and the queen can redefend.
No, that's not quite it. Try again.
Well, that's what I would have done. Oh, okay. Well, then maybe check is forced.
No, that's not quite it. Try again.
Well, okay. So I'm stupid. Yeah, I'm learning here too. I found a skewer, I found a fork. What if I could put the queen in such a place as to, like, let's say if I did capture this, what if I forced a king and queen trade? And then put the other queen in another, well, that wouldn't do any good either because black would be a pawn ahead. What if I forced, oh, yeah, it's a deflection. I see what it is now, I'm going to sneeze. So this is called a deflection. So the knight moves here to attack, that's a forced attack, and then the queen can skewer.
Well done. Knight e5 check. A great move. You see, white sacrifices with a fork to set up a skewer. The black pawn on d6 defends the e5 square. After d takes e5, now what should white play? Queen d1 check. Wins a queen. You see, if we learn these patterns, forks, skewers, and others, in time our intuition will tell us how to combine them. The pin is seen much more often than the skewer, because weaker pieces tend to be more exposed. Whenever you notice two or more of your opponent's pieces lined up on a rank, file, or diagonal, you should be looking for pins and for skewers. The essential power of this weapon is that it temporarily paralyzes a piece, renders it immobile. For example, in this position, the black knight is defending the black rook, but it is also pinned to the black queen by the white bishop. So after rook takes e4, black can't recapture without losing a queen. Remember, only long-distance operators can pin, so the queen, rook, and bishop are who we have to rely on. How can black use a pin to win the white knight? Very good. Queen a7. The knight cannot move or be defended, and next it will be captured. Here it's white's move. Do you notice any pins in the position? Well, the white bishop on h4 pins the black knight on f6. Now, how do we take advantage of that?
You could attack, well, what? The white bishop on h4 pins the black knight. Oh, just attack it with the pawn.
Well done. Here we use the critical idea, attacking the pinned piece. e5 piles up on the paralyzed knight, and black is helpless to defend. Next move, e takes f6 will win a knight for a pawn. Now, if it had been black's move here, he should get the queen out of the pin, a move like queen c7. Liberate the knight. It's white to move here. Use the theme of attacking the pinned piece. Try to calculate both your best moves and black's best defensive tries.
So what piece is pinned? That's the first question. Well, you can pin the knight against the king. The king could move. No, the rook could defend. And then the knight can reattack. The knight can reattack that. The white knight can reattack the attack knight, the pinned knight. That should be winning.
Very good. Bishop c4, attacking the knight on d5 and pinning it to the king on g8. Black has to defend with knight f6. What's white's best move now?
Well, it's only one defender and two attackers.
Well done.
Now, actually, what can happen here now is the rook could come over. He would have two defenders, but then this rook could come over, and white would have three attackers. So it would lose a piece, supposedly.
Knight f4, piling up on the pinned piece. Black has to defend again, and he can, with rook d8. Now the black d5 knight is attacked by two pieces and defended by two pieces. But white can add more pressure. What's white's best move?
Well, when he says more pressure, then that's it.
Yep, that's it. Rook
Yep,
d1.
that's it. Yep,
Now the black
that's
d5
it.
knight is dead. There are three attackers and only two defenders. Black's going to lose a piece. Before we get to this next exercise, I want to emphasize, once again, the importance of avoiding mechanical thinking in chess. If you just assume, for example, that a pinned piece can't move, then you're asking for trouble. Take a look at this position. Here it's black's move. Your knight is pinned down to the queen by the bishop on
The knight
g5.
has a check.
And white has just attacked the pinned knight with e5. But it turns out that white is the one who loses a piece. Why? Black to move. Think creatively here.
Well, if you go check and moves, then the queen captures the bishop.
Good move. Knight g4 check. Gets out of the pin with tempo. White has to respond to the check. And after the white king gets out of the way, we notice that the black queen has opened up an attack on the white bishop. This is called a discovered attack, and it's another very important tactical device which we'll discuss a little later. But this isn't the only way to get out of a pin at the last minute. Check out the next exercise. White looks like he's in trouble here because the knight on b4 is pinned and attacked by both pawn and bishop. There is no way to defend it sufficiently, and there is no way to move it away with tempo, but white can save himself. Do you see how?
Just bear with me for a second here. looks like he's in trouble because the knight on b4 is pinned. There's no way to defend it sufficiently, and there's no way to move it away with tempo, but white can save himself. The only way to save himself would be to re-attack, or he could, yeah, he can play queen to d5. Well, no, that doesn't work either. Wait, why is it pinned? Oh, to the rook. Oh, they can move the knight back and then recapture. Well, moving the knight back doesn't really do anything. Well, he can save himself. This is a little more difficult. If he moves the pawn up and the pawn captures, it's not going to do any good. I don't see this one. If he moves the rook up, forcing the pawn to take. Oh, he can go back, he can skewer with wait, it doesn't force the pawn to take. It forces the bishop to take. But black is still ahead of piece. He moves the pawn up, forcing the pawn to take. What good is that going to do? I need a hint. Think offensively. Can you attack any pieces by unpinning a piece? No. Can't attack the rook. I mean, he could attack the pawn, but what good is that going to do? Oh, he's talking about moving. Well, if it's moving the rook isn't the one that's not pinned. I don't know. Let's just see what happens here.
Here black's d6 knight is pinned, and white's last move was bishop c5, piling up on the pinned piece.
I have no idea what just happened.
White looks like he's in trouble here because the knight on b4 is pinned and attacked by both pawn and bishop.
I see.
There is no way to defend it sufficiently, and there is no way to move it away with tempo, but white can save himself. Do you see how?
He's attacking the queen.
Very good. Rook f1 attacks the black queen and liberates the knight from the pin. If black were to take the knight, bishop takes b4. Then after rook takes f8, white has one material, the equivalent of one pawn, because a queen is worth 9 pawns, a rook is worth 5 pawns, and a knight is worth 3 pawns. So rook 5 plus knight 3
Black
equals
could
8,
still almost win,
9
but
against 8.
maybe
So after rook f1, the black queen should move, say queen e7. And after knight d5, the game goes on. White hasn't lost material.
Alrighty.
Here black's d6 knight is pinned, and white's last move was bishop c5, piling up on the pinned piece. What do you think about this position? Black to move.
Black could play knight to e4, forking the rook and the bishop, but that only trades a rook for a bishop. Black could redefend. Black could play queen to c6, protecting the knight. Well, attacking the bishop's not any good because the queen's protecting it. I mean, you could still defend it, but then if there's two defenders, then white can re-attack, so that wouldn't do any good either. Black to move in this position. Well, there's no checks. I don't know. Black can escape the pin with powerful weapons of his own. Oh, I see what it is. This is a 2 move. So there's a fork between the king and the queen. After it captures rook, then there's a knight fork. Yeah.
Good job. Knight e4. And suddenly white's position is falling apart. White's bishop, rook, and queen are all under fire. Do you see how the queen is attacked? That's right. Knight g3 check, forking king and queen is in the air. This is one of those moments in chess when you're caught juggling too many balls and you just can't keep everything straight. So remember, when we're pinning the opponent, don't blindly trust in the solidity of the pin. Part of the beauty of chess is in its flowing quality. Often the ground, once solid beneath our feet, becomes loose and shifting. We have to keep a flexibility of mind that allows us to flow with the ever-changing conditions. Before moving on, let's look at one more powerful pin. It turns out that in this position, black can use a critical pin to force mate in 3 moves. This one may be a little tough to spot, so take your time and see if you can get it. The theme is the paralyzed defender.
So the king is stuck. The queen, so if we force a check, there's a check with a bishop, there's a check with a knight. If we check with the knight, the king could move, but then if the king moves, that's checkmate. So that would be a forced take by the pawn. Then there's a check. And then there's a mate. Wait, just a minute. Well, there's still the bishop is sitting there, but. It's gotta be the knight move, because that frees the rook. Oh! Wait, I think I see it. So the knight moves, forcing the capture. The rook, oh wait, that square is guarded by a bishop. So you can't play check there. Okay, I'm trying to figure this out here. So if takes, then you've got, you don't have a check. No, the queen's got a problem, but so how does she get out of it? It's got to be that check, but I don't see the mate. And in fact, there's not even a check after that. A critical pin to force mate in 3. Black can use a pin? Where's the... Oh, the pin is... The pawn is pinned, but nothing can move to that square. Oh, the knight's pinned against the queen. What's the queen gonna do? Takes. Queen takes rook. I don't know. Is it getting mate in 3? The paralyzed defender. Well, that pawn... The knight... The queen's not really defending anything. Well, the queen's defending... Or the knight's not defending anything. There's an attack on the queen. But what good's that gonna do? If the queen moves there, queen takes, rook takes, that's no good. If the queen moves there, I don't know. I don't know what it is. Well, I thought about that move.
The paralyzed defender is the white pawn on f2, which is pinned to the king by the black bishop on a7. Remember, whenever a piece is pinned to the king, it really can't move at all. Now find mate in 2. Look for the pin.
That's what I was trying to do earlier. Oh, the queen can go all the way down there. That's check. But that's not mate in 2, though. Well, that's an obvious check. Oh, there it is. I see it now. The rook can move all the way over. After this, I gotta back up.
Before moving on, let's look at one more powerful pin. It turns out that in this position, black can use a critical pin to force mate in 3 moves. This one may be a little tough to spot, so take your time and see if you can get it. The theme is the paralyzed defender.
Well, this pawn is not, it's defending the king, but the way the wording is set is not right. I mean, what if the king moves? Okay, what if he goes here, puts in check, what if the king moves over here? you've got, okay, if the king moves there, and this knight's sitting here, then you've got queen coming down here to do mate. So that's forced, but it still doesn't matter that this thing is pinned. I mean, if the pawn could move and the king could get out of there, maybe, but it's using a wrong analogy or something. I'm just saying this is a good move. This knight's pinned. But what I didn't see was the queen coming down to this square. Because it's like in behind. Oh, I see what they're saying. So the queen can come down to the square because that pawn can't take back the queen because it's paralyzed. That's what they mean by that. And then the rook comes over.
Very good. Knight f3 check. A really powerful move. Of course, if king h1, then queen h2 and rook h5 are both checkmate. So white has to play g takes f3. It's forced. The paralyzed defender is the white pawn on f2, which is pinned to the king by the black bishop on a7. Remember, whenever a piece is pinned to the king, it really can't move at all. Now find mate in 2. Look for the pin.
Well, that's the pin, so...
Good job. Queen g3 check is the hidden weapon. The pawn can't help defend the king because of the pin. White has to play king h1. What's the best move for black now? Good move. Rook h5 mate. This last position was an example of the type of combination you really will see in serious chess games. Black had to sacrifice a knight to set up a very, very difficult pin to spot, to win the game by force. Once again, I want you to notice the perils of thinking mechanically in chess. I believe this lesson holds true in life as well. It's easy to assume that certain elements of a situation will remain stable, but we have to stay present to the moment for all its evolving subtleties. More technically, returning to chess, people have the habit of assuming that pawns around the king are a fortress. But there are ways to slip through walls in chess. You just saw one of them. We saw that the pin can be very powerful, both as a way to win material by piling up on the pinned piece, or as a way to attack utilizing the temporary paralysis of a defender. Now we explore the latter theme a little more deeply. In chess, we don't just aim at our goals. Often we want to remove what is preventing us from achieving our goals. Or, more realistically, we aim to remove what is preventing us from preventing our opponent, from preventing us from achieving our goals, and so on.
I don't know why he pushed that pawn. I mean, that square is attacked by 3 pieces and only defended by 1.
Let's check out some examples. It turns out that in this innocuous-looking position, white is completely winning. How? Whenever you look at a chess position, you should first notice the dramatic elements of the situation: material inequalities, possible checks, captures, or potential for tactics. Here we see that white's queen and bishop are lined up as a battery, aimed at the b7 pawn in black's camp. The black knight on d6 is defending the pawn. Our immediate instinct in such situations should always be to get rid of the defender. The knight on d6 is the only piece that's holding black's position together. Whenever one piece has such a grave responsibility, it becomes vulnerable to attack because it can't defend itself actively due to being completely consumed with the defensive responsibility.
Knight f5.
Given that setup, what should white play? Good move. Knight f5 forks the black queen and the only piece that defends mate. The knight clearly can't capture on f5 because queen takes b7 would be mate. But after the queen moves, for example queen g6, then after knight takes d6 check, white's next move will be queen takes b7 checkmate. White will win the game. Now we're combining some tactical themes. Black to move and win material.
Well, there's a pin, and let's see. We can't attack the knight immediately. Oh, it says black to move and win. There's a skewer. Probably not good with the queen, because that rook's defended anyway. There's a potential knight fork to 2 rooks. Black wants to win material. Okay, so the queen's attacking the knight. The pawn's defending 2 pieces, which is that's an overworked pawn. Black is 2 rooks and a queen. If there is a check, I don't see, well, the material could be a pawn for all that matters. There's an undefended rook. But that doesn't... I don't see it. See, the problem with doing this is that when it's black's turn to move and the black pieces are up on top, you don't see the moves readily, but you should be able to see them from both perspectives anyway. So in other words, like what did White do to get himself into such a crappy position that he's going to lose a piece? He's going to lose something. There's a move, there's knight h5, which threatens a fork, but that's protected. I don't see it. The skewer is there, but it's defended. White back rank, White's back rank. Oh, now I see it, because the other rook is over there. That whole rank is open. See, I wasn't even looking at that part of the board. I mean, I have this problem sometimes in over the board chess, is you don't see the whole board. So then, yeah, so queen just takes the knight. Yep.
Very good. Queen takes b3. A fantastic sacrifice. It's only temporarily sacrificing the queen, though. If White doesn't recapture, then Black has just won a knight for free. And after Rook takes b3, then Rook a1 check, a powerful skewer. King d2, Rook takes h1, wins back the queen, and Black comes out a knight ahead. So, we always want to notice potential tactics, what defends those tactics, and how we can remove the defensive idea. Now, once again with the aim of avoiding mechanical thinking, let's look at a variant of the last position. Here, once again, it's Black's move. Does Queen takes b3 still work? This one might be a little tough to spot, but it turns out that White can turn the tables here. After Queen takes b3, it's White to move. Find the best move.
is not a good idea. White can turn the tables. Oh yeah, there's a forced mate. So if the queen moves over to d1 and the queen, if the queen goes there to protect, that's check, that's check. Queen can capture it. No, that just evens the board. That doesn't work because the knight's protecting that square. Oh, wait. What? This is really difficult. What if queen plays to e? Well, then the queen can do that. That doesn't work. I don't know. I see that move. Queen moves, then it's check. Takes, take, check. Knight can pin. I mean, the knight can block. That's not gonna. That forces mate. Wait a minute. The queen can block. The queen is forced to block. If the knight blocks. No. Wait, the queen's sitting there. And the queen blocks. It's a trade. The knight takes back. The queen black is ahead. So I don't see it. I'm gonna play this move, but I don't see it. No, that can't be right because black could still come down and skewer. It's a skewer either way. Oh. Now you could double attack the queen. Oh, I got an even better idea. Let's try this move.
No, that's not quite right. Try again.
Well, what the hell's wrong with that move? Yes, dude. Well, these are my other ideas, but they don't work.
No, that's not quite right. Try again.
And this doesn't work.
No, that's not quite right. Try again.
If the king moves, well, the king could move.
No, that's not quite right. Try again.
I mean, that's the only other move.
No, that's not quite right. Try again.
I don't know. I don't know what the hell it is. I can't think. It's getting too late.
Here it's white's move.
Excuse
Now,
me.
once again with the aim of avoiding mechanical thinking, let's look at a variant of the last position.
Oh,
Here, once again, it's
alright.
black's move.
It's a
Does queen takes
deflection.
b3 still work? This one might be a little tough to spot, but it turns out that white can turn the tables here. After queen takes b3, it's white to move.
So it still
Find the
gets-
best move.
It's a deflection. It's a deflection is what it is.
Good work. Rook d8 check, a fantastic sacrifice that wins material by removing the attacker. Okay, this is the logic of the position. The black queen is hanging, but is indirectly defended by the rook on a8, which is about to deliver the powerful skewer rook a1 check. So the question is, in this precarious moment, can white throw a wrench into black's plans? The solution to this problem brings up another critical tactical device, called the in-between move, also known by its German name, Zwischenzug. In the middle of the tactics, white throws in the Zwischenzug rook d8 check, and suddenly he's forced the removal of the attacker, who is just the key component of a tactic based on removing the defender. Black has to capture the rook, Knight e8 doesn't change anything after rook takes e8. So, rook takes d8, and now white can take the queen without getting skewered on a1. C takes b3, and white has won some material instead of losing a knight. So remember, you aren't the only one looking for tactics in a chess game. Many positions involve complicated combinations of exchanges like the one in the last position, and now you're learning to navigate through that jungle. Here it's white's move. Should white play rook takes b5?
Well, now that I've seen that last move, what good is that going to do, trading a rook for a knight? Oh. That's a deflection move. He can't take the knight. It's a free knight, because if he does, it's mate. Yes.
The answer is a resounding no. The idea is good, removing the defender of the back rank. But unfortunately the tactics don't work because of another in-between move. Rook takes b5 attempts to remove the defender of the back rank, but black can win material. Do you see how? f5 check, a powerful Zwischenzug, makes Luft for the black king in checks. Makes Luft in chess means opening up breathing room for the king so you don't get stuck in the back rank. f5 check frees up the f7 square for the black king, he can escape. White takes the pawn, king takes f5, and then black can take the rook, rook takes b5, and after rook e8 check, there's the open escape route, king f7. Once again, always look for tricky in-between moves when you're calculating tactics. I'm showing these exceptions because it's very important for us to learn how to defend and attack with and from these tactical weapons. Also, once again, we should never tire of looking for subtle wrinkles in the position that may reverse the fate of the game. Such possibilities are much of the beauty and excitement of chess. Now, back to some pure removing the defender problems. Here it's black's move. What should you do?
There's a check. Oh, there's a skewer between the rook and the king, the defender. So yeah, rook captures knight. And wins the knight.
You got it. Rook takes f3, sacrificing the exchange to remove the defender of a powerful forking square. White recaptures, g takes f3. Now what? Well done. Bishop d4 check. And next, after bishop takes a7, black has won a piece. Again, whenever you see pieces lined up on a diagonal or a straight line, your spider sense should go off. Where are the forks, pins, skewers? Here white has the tempting option of just munching on the a6 pawn, rook a6 check. This is a free pawn, but there's better. It's white's move here. Find your best move.
There's better. Well, the bishop's pinned. You could pin the bishop. Oh, I see what it is. It's a double attack. So the pawn moves ahead, attacks the knight, which releases a discovered attack on the bishop from the rook.
Very good. d5. At once opening up a discovered attack on the bishop on f4, and removing its defender, the knight on e6. White will win a piece here. Now you're getting used to combining tactical ideas. It's black to move here. What do you think?
So first what you do is you look for the idea. So if black to move, like, is there a mate? Is there a smothered mate? Maybe not. The queen's sitting there. Can I win the queen? Can I remove a defender? there's a fork. Okay, there's a fork between the king and the queen, but knight's defending. So attacking the knight is not going to do much. If the knight goes down there directly and the knight moves, there's a check. But that's not going to do any good. So how do I move the defender? I mean, I could attack it, but it's too slow. Well, it's pinned. It's pinned. What's that going to do? Oh, the queen's attacking that knight. Queen wins the knight. That's the defender. And then there's the fork.
Good move. Queen takes f3 check. An excellent sacrifice. Now g takes f3. What's your best move? Knight d2 check. Now the king moves and knight takes b3. Black has won a piece. So you're sacrificing your queen to remove the defender of a critical forking square. Black to move here. Now this might be the hardest problem you've run into so far, but the answer is logical and you can get it. Take your time and enjoy the challenge. Remember, first notice your biggest potential threats, then notice what's defending against that threat. In this particular problem, you have to go one step further. You have to then notice how you can potentially remove the defender, but there is a defender stopping your attempt to remove the defender. So finally, you have to figure out how to remove the defender that is preventing you from removing the defender. Don't move until you see it.
So this is like the puzzle thing on light chess or whatever. I mean, they got puzzles. So first we're learning the tactics, and then the basic tactics, and then that sort of thing. But we want to learn about other things. I want to get into, well, probably not basic openings. I wonder about the pawn thing. We could probably change that. Defender of what? I mean, it's hard to do these puzzles because you're not playing into the game, you're just looking at it's black to move. Oh, there's a mate. So, the queen's defending that pawn. So we could deflect the queen off that square with the bishop. And the queen's got nowhere to move. If the queen moves, it's mate. Oh, but the knight's protecting that square. The knight's protecting that square. We could do the deflection, but the knight's sitting there. How can we move the knight? Oh, there's a fork between the knight and the rook, which kind of forces an exchange. Let's say if it doesn't force an exchange, let's say if the knight does the fork, and does the queen have the white have another option? Does the queen, wait, it's black to move. So if the knight does the fork, then white has to lose the knight to prevent mate. And that's g3. So how does that force anything? I'm going to take a chance and say it's this knight move, but I don't think it works. What the hell? Don't move until you see it? I can't move. Can't move any pieces.
Okay, Black wants to play queen takes g2 mate, but white's queen on f1 is defending the square.
Yeah.
We want to get rid of that queen.
Yeah.
Any ideas?
Yeah.
Ideally, it would be nice to play bishop e2, because that would win the queen.
Yeah.
But the white knight on c3 guards the e2 square.
Yeah.
So the aim of our tactic is to get rid of the c3 knight. Now try to get it.
Alright, so the only way to do that is this knight move.
Excellent work. Knight b5, forking the white rook on a7 and the knight on c3, which at this point is worth the queen because of the imminent threat of bishop e2, removing the defender of the g2 square. So queen takes b5 is impossible because of queen takes g2 mate.
Yeah.
If knight takes b5, then bishop e2 will win the queen because it can't move.
Yeah.
If white moves the rook, then knight takes c3, followed by bishop e2, will win the queen or mate.
Yeah.
So white will have to defend the mate and give up lots of material in the process.
Yep.
Knight b5 is a great move that makes perfect sense when you think backwards in the position. Notice your goal, and then figure out how to get there. I'll discuss this manner of thinking more deeply in part 3, where we go into chess strategy. So don't worry if you didn't get this problem right. The idea is to learn from wrestling with real challenges. Now you're really experiencing what chess is all about.
Really? Okay. What's the next? So let me go back here. Oh, it's discovery.
Now on to our next weapon, discoveries. We've already seen a couple discovered attacks in earlier positions in the course. This is a very powerful device, especially when the discovered attack is check, known as discovered check, like in this position. Here, white can win black's queen with the discovered checks knight d4 or knight d2, both opening up the white queen's attack on the black king while aiming the knight at the queen.
So these are discovered, not just discovered checks, but discovered attacks.
Here you can really see the power of the discovery, because the black bishop can go after any white piece he wants to, because they are all on light squares. Now, what's the best discovery?
There's a check. Well, there's a double check. But he can't, but that dark square is not guarded, so he could take a pawn and attack the queen. He could attack the queen and a rook. I think taking a pawn would be better. Well, I don't know. Why not? He gets a free pawn. So if he takes a pawn and then it's check and he moves over, he can move the bishop back out. If he moves over there, discovery, takes and then takes a queen, it's a queen for a bishop. So he could get a pawn and a queen by doing that.
Very good. Bishop takes g2 is one of two best discoveries. There's one more. Can you find it? You got it. Bishop c4 discovered check, winning the queen. In this position, it's black to move and win as much material as possible. You have to calculate several moves ahead here.
This is looks like it might be a repetitive check type of thing. If it's check first, knight moves, attacks queen. No, that doesn't work. There's no fork. There's a bishop sitting there. Oh, I see what's going on. After the check, there's a discovered check. That takes the queen. But that doesn't run the work that way. I win the work. So there's check, then there's a discovered check, and wins the queen. But there's no check afterwards, unless... sometimes in this type of position there's a smothered mate. But I don't see it.
Excellent work. Knight c2 check forces the king to b1. What's next? Good move. Knight e3 check, a powerful discovery. Next will be knight takes g4, winning the queen. Now it's white to move and win material. See the whole board.
There's an attack on the queen with a rook. The knight's defending the square. White's moving win material. There's a pawn push. Oh, attacking the queen wins the knight. So the queen could play. If the queen plays queen to c7, it's still defending the knight. Then what? How's that gonna work? Yeah, he could trade the queens and then attack the knight after to get the queen off the board. Well, then the knight can just move. I'm not 100% sure. I mean, if he attacks the queen and deflects the queen, and then attacks the knight can still move. If that takes and that takes with rook. I can't see it.
No, that's not quite right. Try again.
Yeah, that's what I thought. There's a pawn in the middle of the board. It ain't gonna work. I don't see this one. I mean, if the pawn moves up, oh, I see what it is. Yep. When the pawn attacks the queen, the knight's free. It's a discovered attack on that knight.
Good job. e5 attacks the black queen and opens up the fourth rank, so the white queen also threatens the black knight on a4. There is no way for the queen to move and defend her knight, so white will win a piece for a pawn. After queen takes e5, queen takes a4. A lot of chess players have the habit of focusing on one part of the board. Here you can see the importance of seeing everything. Black to move and win material here. What do you think? Be careful here. Notice where there may be some potential for discovered attacks, and then be sure to prepare your tactic properly.
Alright, so there's a discovered attack on that knight. He could do a double attack on the bishop, which is free. The bishop can come back while the other knight's defended. He could win a pawn. It's black to move and win. What if he takes that knight? What if he takes a pawn? The pawn is sitting there free. I don't think it's the right move. Like, knight captures pawn, it's just sitting there free. But the other move is, if this pawn moves up, this bishop can just come back here and protect the knight. know this is wrong.
No, that's not quite right. Try again.
Yeah, I know. Well, let's see what happens.
That's not quite right. There's better.
Oh, if he takes the knight first. Oh, then the queen is sitting there. That's how it is. He takes the knight first. It's a free knight.
Excellent work. Knight takes g4, queen takes g4, d5, opening up a discovery on the queen and attacking the bishop on c4. Now if white moves the queen, black will take the bishop on c4. But what happens if white blocks with knight f5? Remember, no mechanical thinking. Here it would be a terrible mistake to take the bishop, because then queen takes g7 would be mate. Often in chess, when you're just inches from victory, the opponent has some last tricks up the sleeve. What should black play here?
Just double attack the knight.
No, that's not quite right. Try again.
Well, shit. I mean, that's the pinned piece. You attack the pinned piece. Oh, well, he could take the knight outright, trade the bishop, and just win it.
Very good. An in-between move. Bishop takes f5. Removing the attacker of the g7 square, and after queen takes f5, only then d takes c4 wins a piece. So be careful to set your tactics up properly.
A lot of the stuff is happening with
This problem is extra tricky. White is up a huge amount of material, and black doesn't have forced mate. Seems like a recipe for disaster. But black to play and win. Take your time here. My guess is this will be your deepest chess calculation yet, but try to find a pattern. Don't worry if this problem stretches your brain a little. The idea is to keep white in the box, and take as much material as possible without letting him out of the box.
This is ridiculous because it's asking me to do moves from black's point of view, and black's on the top of the board. It's twice as difficult to find moves from the other side of the board. It says black to move again. There's a check. Well, if he takes the rook first, then there's no check. Wait, no, it's black to move. Oh, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? There's two pieces on that rook. Oh, I see what this is. This is where the rook can continuously put the king in check and grab pieces.
Good work. Rook takes g2 check, king h1. And now?
Well, I thought it was. Oh, it's a discovered check. But that's... He can win all these pieces back here. If he goes up here first, then the king forces to move here. There's no discovery. But he can grab all these pieces.
No, that's not quite it. Try again.
That's bullshit, okay? Because you go here, it's discovered check. That forces the king to move here. You go back here for check again. That forces the king to move back. Then you take the bishop. I mean, the rook can go all the way across and grab the queen in the end here. You don't grab the knight.
Yep, that's it. Rook takes g3 check. Discovery. Now, of course, the idea for black here is to take as much as possible without allowing white to stop the checks. So rook takes d2 would have been a terrible mistake, because then white could block the check with knight e4 and win the game.
Oh, I didn't see that.
After rook takes g3 check, you see you're actually checking and removing the defender of the e4 square. White has to move the king. King h2.
Oh
Now,
my
if you haven't found
God.
the answer yet, then take your time and work from here.
Yeah, I see it now. Wait.
Excellent work. Rook g2 check. King h1. Rook takes g4. King h2. Of course, if the white bishop ever blocks with bishop e4, then bishop takes e4 check, and it doesn't matter. So the king goes to h2. Now the rook returns to g2 check, forcing the king back into the box, king h1. Now you can go on to capture all the pawns and pieces on the second rank.
Yeah.
So now your tactical arsenal is complete.
So it was
The last
there,
exercise you did was designed to reinforce how important it is to learn basic patterns and then apply them in complex situations. By recognizing a pattern of discovered checks, suddenly you were able to do a 20-move chess calculation. This type of learning, by building from the core out, is central to my approach to chess. Now let's move on to the mastery quiz, which should help reinforce the ideas we've been discussing.
Oh boy.
In this mastery quiz, you'll be asked to find combinations that include 2 or more of the tactical devices you just learned. I may not tell you in which direction to look, but you can rest assured the solution involves 1 or more of the themes you were taught in parts 1 and 2. Sometimes the solution will involve mate, and sometimes it will involve winning or saving material. If you're having a really hard time with an exercise, just hit the hint button, and I'll tell you what themes to keep an eye out for. Good luck. It's black to move here. The answer involves a double attack.
Yeah, this is gonna be hard right from the freaking get-go. See, this is hard to do with black point of view. A double attack. Well, that's on that knight. Oh, okay. You see it?
No, that's not quite it. Try again.
Are you serious? Fuck. I mean, oh, the knight can take it. Well, if he goes here, the queen just takes it. There's an attack there. Oh, okay. The pawn can't take it. Oh, he could go here. What if he goes here? There's nothing to attack. The knight can capture that. I don't know where it is. There's too much shit going on. That's why I don't play chess anymore. That's why you shouldn't play chess anymore. If I go there, then I can take it. Oh, either way, it doesn't matter. Or does it? If it go here, I think that's the best move.
No, that's not quite it. Try again.
Why not? If the knight takes... Well, that ain't the move. Or the bishop could go... This is fucking hard. Well, the bishop could put in check. What good's that gonna do? I'm just gonna throw it down there.
No, that's not quite it. Try again.
Yeah, no, kiss it. Oh, there's this move. Oh, this is... No, there's this move.
No, that's not quite it. Try again.
No, figures. God, this is gonna be fucking hard. If I could get the queen out of there to do something, I could attack both of these knights. Oh, there's a mate. Yeah, he's gotta go, there's a mate here. So he's gotta protect for the mate, and that moves the queen, so the pawn can move up.
Very good. Queen h5, threatening mate on h2. White has to defend with a move like h3, after which b5 forks the two knights. You see, the black queen was occupying the b5 square, so you freed up that square for the pawn and attacked mate with tempo. In the future, to help you out spotting pawn forks, whenever two pieces are situated like these two knights here, next to each other with one space in between, a pawn can fork them. Notice that pattern. Keep it in mind.
Yep, I know.
It's black to move here. Mate in 2 using a discovery.
This might be like that smothered. So, if the knight moves here, it's double check. That forces the king to move back, but there's no check afterwards. So if the knight moves here, okay, that's forced to move the king back, and then the knight moves here. That's a double, that's check with mate.
That's not quite right. There's better.
Excuse me? That's a double check. Okay? That forces the king to move. The king has to move here. Oh wait, so if the knight moves here, that's not a double check. The pawn can take it. Well, if he moves there, there's no other check. Oh, there's a queen. Yeah, there's a queen over there. The queen's way the hell stuck in the back over here.
Well done. Knight c3 double check. The bishop on g6 and the knight on c3 are both attacking the king. Notice, of course, that if the black knight were to move somewhere other than c3 or d2, if it were only check one way, from the bishop on g6, then white could capture knight takes g6 with a check of his own. So after knight c3 check, the white king is forced to move to a1. What's your next move? Excellent work. Queen takes a2 checkmate. So in positions when you have discoveries, always look for the most forcing discoveries. Double check is a great option. This is a very famous endgame position. It's white to move here. The idea, obviously, is to promote your pawn and win the black rook. Take your time. A skewer comes to play here.
Skewer. Well, there's a deflection check and a check, but that ain't gonna work. That's a, wait, it's white to move. How could that be a how could that be a skewer? Oh yeah, I see what it is. I see what it is. You see it?
Good work. The correct move is rook h8, a really powerful trick. So now let's review this endgame for a minute. First of all, if the black king had been on g6, we see that the white rook can get away with rook g8 check with tempo. Then the king moves, and b8 queen wins the game. If the black king is on f7, or e7 for that matter, then rook h8, wins the game. Because after rook takes b7, rook h7 is a skewer winning the rook. Otherwise, next move will make a queen.
It's easy to figure out things when there's less pieces on the board.
If black checks the white king with rook b2 check, ultimately he'll run out of space. King f3, rook b3, king e2, rook b2, king d3, rook b3, king c2, zigzagging in, the white king actively chases the rook to the b7 square, after which rook h7 again will win the rook.
That's a tactic right there. That's a where you're using the king as an attacking piece.
It turns out that in this position, if the black king is on g7 or h7, the position is drawn. The reason is, first of all, there's no check. There's no rook g8 check or rook f8 check with tempo, because if white plays rook g8 check here, black can just capture the rook and then take the pawn. Then black wins. There's no skewer also, because there's no room on the king side for the black rook to slip behind the black king. So the only way for white to try to win this position would be to bring the king towards the b7 pawn, to try to defend the pawn. Notice if this were the position, and then the white rook were to move, white would be winning, because the white king defends the b7 pawn, and next move would be to move ahead, b8, making a queen.
Now the other thing is, like, the rook could play. Yeah, that's what he said, moving the king over. As soon as the king moves off of that square, well, if he goes here, and the rook moves, and the king moves, the rook's got to move back. So if the king keeps moving, this king just keeps moving over towards this pawn, and eventually there's going to be a skewer.
The problem is that white can't do this. The second the white king gets to c6, black can start checking. Rook c1 check. The white king has nowhere to go. King b6, rook b1 check. King a6, rook a1 check. As long as the king stays on this half of the chessboard, black has perpetual check. If the king comes back, king b5, rook b1 check, king c4, rook c1 check, king b3, rook b1 check, king c2, now black can stay behind the passed pawn with a move like rook b5 or rook b6, doesn't really matter. And still white can't make progress. When the king comes back, king c3, rook can just come back to b1. And when the king approaches the pawn, the checks can begin again. So here you see the power of a rook behind the passed pawn. This is a rule in the endgames in chess. Rooks belong behind passed pawns. Here, the black rook is active. It can at once defend this pawn from promoting, and it can check the white king whenever the king gets close. The white rook, on the other hand, on b8, is stuck on this one square. It's in front of the pawn. If the rooks were reversed, like this, then white would win easily. The black rook can't move because the b8 queening square is defended by the white rook, and white can just bring the king into the game. King c4 to c5 to c6 to c7, and win. That's a basic theory of this position.
Player stupid ad. Say thank you to our troops. Yeah, I was a troop once. Wait a minute, this isn't. Yeah, it is.
It's white's move here. Sacrifice to set up a powerful fork.
the fork's probably going to be from the knight. So if you deflect the king here, you can sacrifice a knight and then fork again. And then you've got a knight. Yeah, that'll work. You're losing a knight and a rook. So you've got a knight. The knight can block here. There's two passed pawns. There's two pawns versus one over here, and the king's over on this side. So that should be winning for white. It doesn't matter which. Oh yeah, it does matter actually. Or does it? No, wait. It's white to move. Set up. Oh, he has to deflect first. Okay.
Excellent work. Rook f7 check. A good sacrifice. King takes f7. It turns out that either white knight can take on e5, but let's say knight c takes e5, d takes e5, knight takes e5 check, forking the king and the queen. Now king e6, knight takes f3, and white wins the game. So keep your eyes out for sacrifices to set up forks. It's black to move here. See the whole board. Look for a fork.
Move. It's just ridiculous. There's a forking position here, but the king's in the way. I mean, that doesn't fork black to move. Look for a fork. There's queen captures queen as a pawn sitting there. But then that loses a knight. There's a check. See, I can't see this from black's point of view. If the damn board was reversed, I could probably see it. And white wouldn't be getting into that kind of position. It's too open anyway. Black's knight's not in the best position. There's a fork where the queen is sitting if the pawn is missing. There's a fork between the queen and the knight. The knight could get removed. No. That's not gonna do anything. Oh, well. I don't know. I can't see this one. I can't see it from black's point of view. It just doesn't work. It's like I'm trying to think fucking backwards or something. I have no clue. Win material with the fork, huh? You don't win material. That forces an exchange on e5. So if I go there, knight takes, I get the knight back, but I'm just attacking the queen. There's no fork there. I have no idea. can win. Maybe it's this move. I don't know.
No, that's not quite it.
Yeah, right.
No, that's not quite it.
Yeah, I know. Okay. How about this one?
No, that's not quite it.
Yeah, I know. Okay. Okay. Those are the only pieces that can fork to win a piece.
No, that's not quite it.
I don't know what it is. Oh my god, come on.
Here it's white to move and win. It's black to move here. See the whole board. Look for a fork.
That's hard to find with black. I mean, look at this. That is ridiculously hard to find.
Yep, that's it. Queen a5 check is a very powerful move, forking the king on e1 and the knight on h5. This one might have been tricky to find because you have to see the whole board. Here it's white to move and win. Don't move until you see it.
And sneeze here. White to move and win. Don't move until you see it. Okay. Is this where I can't move the piece? White to move. It's white to move and win. That's gotta be too slow. White just takes the queen. It's not the right move. Well, if white takes the rook and puts the king there, there's a forking square, but then I can't get to it there. Oh, white can win. If white wins, takes the rook and gets the queen. Knight takes the queen. It's a queen for a rook for a knight.
Well done. Queen takes g8, sacrificing to set up a mate. King takes g8, and now what does white play? Rook h8. Checkmate. Again, I warn you against mechanical thinking. It's very easy to never even consider moves like queen takes g8. But if you notice the patterns, notice the bishop and the rook honing in on the h8 square, the knight on d6 guarding the f7 square, you'll start to feel the black king is in danger. Then you'll find a move like queen takes g8. Often we have a sense in chess that there's something in the position, long before we actually find what that something is. It's white to move here. Again, see the whole board.
So if if white takes the knight, it's really not forced. But then that would be check. And he could block. He could trade. Oh, he's got that square. That's a lot of freaking moves. It's gotta be rook captures knight. Then check. But the king could just move. I don't see what the continuation is.
Very good. Rook takes g4, an excellent sacrifice. H takes g4, and now do you see the fork? Queen h2 check, going after the king on h8 and the rook on b8 on the opposite side of the board. White wins.
Big ass fucking.
Here it's black to move. What do you think?
So we're looking at a skewer. There's no way to block it. There's check there. Oh, that's protected. White, black can take the knight. Oh, wait a minute. I can't do the skewer because... Oh, it's protected. I can go down there to do the skewer. But I still lose the knight. Oh, it's black to move. Oh my fucking god. I was figuring white to move. It's always black to move, and black's on the top of the freaking board. I don't know. I don't think you can learn this way. You've got to have the pieces on the bottom of a computer chessboard in order to learn. You can't learn from looking at your opponent's moves. That's like learning from mistakes. What if queen captures? There's ambiguity there. See, I can't see this one at all. I can't see it.
Okay, in this position it's white to move. Here it's black to move. What do you think?
Huh. The black takes the pawn. Why not just take it back with the bishop? What the hell am I missing? Oh, removes the defender from the queen. Yep. That's a deflection.
Way to go.
Those
Bishop
are
takes
harder to
c2 check. A great move, removing the defender. White has no choice but to take on c2 with the rook, and now obviously queen takes e1 check. The rook on c1 isn't guarding it anymore. Black wins the queen. Okay, in this position it's white to move. You have to combine a sacrifice, a pin, and a fork to win material. Take your time.
Black, it's white to move, thank God. Well, there's a check. If we sacrifice, oh, we could sacrifice, wait. We can get rid of the pawn with, if we use that rook, what if the king moves? Isn't that going to be a problem? If the king moves, there's no fork. Two rooks on the back rank are much more powerful. That's not, well, that is a sacrifice. The bishop takes it. If the other rook takes it and the bishop takes, the bishop's pinned. Then we can do the fork. If that rook takes, if the back rank rook takes, it doesn't matter, the king could just move. There's a bishop back there attacking that square. There's a fork there. could remove the bishop, the pawn is pinned. But I can't move the bishop right away. Oh, so if I take it with the bottom rook, no, if I take it with the back rank rook, there's no pin on the bishop. But what if the rook moves? What if the king moves? The king could just move out of the way. Then it would be a free knight with check there. If the king moves, I think it's a back rank rook. That moves the bishop. It's gotta be this rook right here.
Very good. Rook d takes d7. A very strong move. After bishop takes d7, what does white play?
Well, there's a fork, obvious.
Now the point is that the bishop is pinned to the black king by the rook on h7, so it can't move.
Yeah.
What is white's best move?
Yeah.
Excellent work. Here white has knight e6 check, a powerful fork, winning the black queen. Again, we're training your chess intuition here. Whenever you see a king and a queen set up like this, with only one square apart, a knight fork might be in the air. Look for it.
The king could.
Let's continue with this position. Let's say that after rook d takes d7 check, black doesn't capture, but tries to run away instead.
Right.
Let's say king b8. What should white do here?
Well,
I don't want you to just play one move. Take your time. You have forced mate in 3 moves. What is it?
Well, captures the knight is obvious. That's check. But he can't capture the next pawn because the queen's guarding the pawn. But the queen can get into play. Oh, wait. Oh, there's a discovered check. Yeah, it's gotta be this move.
You got it. Rook takes b7 check. King a8. Now mate in 2. We can't forget about this bishop on h1.
No shit, Sherlock. So if I go there, oh wait. Did he say mate in 1? If I go here, if I go there, let's check. It doesn't work. If I go here, it's a discovered check. King moves back here. He said mate in 1. That's not a mate in 1. Oh, maybe it is because it's double check. Double check that forces the king has to move, but the king take. Oh, he can't take it because it's protected by that back rank rook.
Well done. Now rook takes a7 check is a double check. The bishop on h1 and the rook on a7 are both checking because it's discovery from the bishop. The king has to move, but of course the rook on h7 is guarding his other rook on a7. Black has to play king b8. Now what do?
Well, you put him in check again. You could win pieces right and left. You can't bring the queen up. Oh, the other rook.
Well done. Here there are 2 checkmates. The first is rook h to b7. The king has nowhere to go. And the other mate is rook to a8 mate. This one is particularly nice because the bishop on h1 guards the rook all the way on the opposite corner of the board.
That's a pretty.
And the rook on
mate.
h7 cuts off the 7th rank. Black is in checkmate.
Yeah, it's
White wins the
prettier.
game.
All right, big deal.
Black's position looks rough here, but he has mate in 2. I actually used this tactic quite a bit when I was younger. Take your time. Black to move, force mate in 2.
All right, this is a smothered mate. I think. Yeah, it's a smothered mate.
Good move. The solution to this problem is called a smothered mate. Queen g1 check is how you begin. This looks strange because the rook can obviously capture the queen. Note, the king can't capture it because the knight on h3 defends that square. After rook takes g1 though, the white king has nowhere to go. So knight f2 check is a beautiful move. Checkmate, a smothered mate. Here you can really see the power of the knight, the only piece that can jump over other pieces. Mates the white king alone. It's white to move here. This one might be difficult to spot. You have to set up a fork.
Oh. There's two forking possibilities. There's with the rooks, there's the pawn behind the knight, which is difficult to get to. There's a check. There's a sacrifice there. Black doesn't have any threats. There's I don't see that there's a skewer on the that doesn't work. Oh, you said something about a fork. You have to set up a fork. There's a fork with the bishop in that. If the bishop takes, what good's that gonna do? This is difficult, alright. Jeez, on Christmas. I mean, even still. Oh, you are deflecting the pawn off but there's still a defender. The rook defends the knight. I don't see it. These are hard. Actually, that knight doesn't have anywhere to move. If he pushes that pawn, I mean, he could attack the bishop. No, yeah, he could attack the. Wait, he could exchange bishops. That's forced. Then, if he attacks the knight with the pawn, he could take it. He could take the other pawn, and then you've got the queen sit. No, that's protected. No, it ain't, because that pawn will be blocking. So the queen will take them two pawns, and you could have an endless check. So that ain't gonna work. Well, the king could get out of there, but that isn't the move. I do not know what this is. I'm gonna skip it. Well, alright, so it was a
It's
bishop.
white to move here and win a pawn.
It was a
It's white to move here. This one might be difficult to spot. You have to set up a fork.
Oh, set up a fork. Huh. So that attacks the queen. The queen is trapped. But that just exchanges a piece. How the hell is that gonna work? Okay? There's no fork. I mean, the rook can come back and take that square that the knight's sitting on. Because it's protected by that pawn. I don't see it.
Good job. Bishop b4. A very strong move. The black queen has nowhere to go but to capture that bishop. Queen takes b4. Now white to move. Do you see the win? Knight a6 check. A royal fork. Hitting the black king on b8 and the queen on b4. White's going to win the queen. Because of black's position looks rough here, but he has mate in 2. I actually used this tactic quite a bit when I was younger. Take your time. Black to move. Force. It's white to move here. This one might be difficult to spot. You have to set up a fork.
So the fork is between where the white knight moves here to attack the king and the queen on that square, not pushing the pawn up. I didn't see that.
Good job. Bishop b4. A very strong move. The black queen has nowhere to go but to capture that bishop. Queen takes b4. Now white to move. Do you see the win? Knight a6 check.
It all has
A
to
royal
do with
fork.
your knights
Hitting
being
the
able
black
to
king on
attack
b8
backwards
and the queen on
and
b4.
forwards.
White's going to win the queen. Because of this tactic, we refer to the bishop on b4 as being indirectly defended by the knight on c5. It's white to move here and win a pawn. You can take advantage of black's pin.
So there's a pin. The knight is pinned. He's got 2 pieces attacking that square and only 1 defending. White wins a pawn. Oh. If bishop takes pawn, check. He can move the bishop back somewhere. And then if knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, that would be not too good for black. This was a little easier, I think.
No, that's not quite it.
Oh, come on, are you shitting me? Well, how else is he gonna win a pawn? I mean, he can take the pawn with the knight. That's stupid. Then he just loses the queen. There's no forks afterwards. I don't know. I'm gonna just. I just did not see.
But black
that.
has a much more tempting move. After knight takes e5, what black wants to do is bishop takes queen on d1. The knight on f3 after all was pinned. But what does white have in mind here? In this position is a beautiful mate in 2. Take your time. Do you see it?
Oh my god, there was.
It's white to move here and win a pawn. You can take advantage of black's pin.
How's there a mate in 2? He didn't tell me that before. A mate in 2 after the bishop takes the queen? See, this game, it plays white as e4, and I never play that. I never play e4 openings. So I'd never fall into that trap as white, whatever the trap is. But now you're trying to figure out a tactic. Like, it's a mate in this case. Oh, by taking that pawn, he's attacking the f7 square twice. You know what? I've seen this before. This is a classical checkmate. And the better option um, is not to take the queen. Maybe to move the pawn. I don't know. I'd have to look at this. Well, I get it streamed. I think there's a better move for black after knight takes. But I don't see the mate in 2, huh? So, alright, so there's a check there with the bishop. If the knight moves, if this knight moves here on that square, you get 2 knights on these back squares. There's a check here. He can't move there. He can't move there because of the bishop. He can't move there because of the knight. So that's a mate. So it's bishop captures queen, bishop takes, check, and then knight takes mate. So black has to play some other move, like maybe protecting here.
Very good. Knight takes e5, a shocking and very strong move. Black has 2 options here. He can either take the queen on d1, which is obviously the tempting move, or he can play d takes e5. First of all, if black plays d takes e5, then white can play queen takes g4, and white's won a pawn. Sometimes you can turn your opponent's pin into your discovery.
That's the move for black.
But black has a much more tempting move. After knight takes e5, what black wants to do is bishop takes queen on d1. The knight on f3 after all was pinned. But what does white have in mind here? In this position is a beautiful mate in 2.
Yeah, I know.
Take your time. Do you see it?
Yeah.
Yep, that's it. Bishop takes f7 check. The d7 square is defended by the white knight on e5, so black has to play king e7. Now mate in 1, knight d5, checkmate. A beautiful central attack. White's 3 minor pieces go after the black king and win the game. Once again, I warn you against mechanical thinking. It's very easy to see that knight on f3 and think it can never move. Always look for a way to get out of a pin with tempo. In this position, knight takes e5 turned the tables on black's pin. This position is actually from a game I played in the New York City Elementary School Championship in 1988. My opponent was a boy named Nicholas Proudfoot. He had the white pieces, I was black. Here I have forced mate in 4. Take your time, black to move. You just learned the critical idea in the last exercise.
Forced mate in 4 moves. So instead of counting the moves, you want to look for the pattern. How the hell's that going to be a forced mate? Forced mate in 4 moves. Well, maybe the queen can go under attack somehow. Oh my god, I'm thinking of white to move again, because it's at the bottom of the fucking board. Now I have to reanalyze the whole position all over again. could be a smothered mate. What if the 4 moves? What if the queen just goes down there and puts him in check? That forces knight capture, and that's a smothered mate. Isn't it? The only way out of that is... Oh wait, no, the king can capture, and it's not smothered. Oh, there's a discovered check with the knight. So if the knight moves there, king moves. Alright, then there's a double check with the knight here. If the king moves here, then let's see. Let's check. King moves here. Check. Double check. If the king moves back, that's not forced. Capturing the knight is not forced. Knight moves. He moves here. He moves here. If the king moves here, then queen moves here is mate. That forces the king to move back here. If the knight is sitting here, then the queen can move down here. But that's being defended by that knight. And then the queen could get into the picture. I know this is the right move. Maybe, well, I can't see it.
Good job. First, knight f2 check. King g1. Now it's mate and 3 for black. Take your time, play the best move. Notice, of course, the black knight can move anywhere it wants to with discovered check, but there's only one way to force mate. Do you see it?
If he goes here, that's still... If he goes here, that's still forced here. So he can't go here because it just goes back and forth. So he's got to go here. King moves here. Oh, but there's no check though. Is it here? Wait, is it? He needs to attack that square with a double check right there. So he could go here. It's check. King moves here. If the knight moves there with a check, the king cannot move back to that square. Wait. If pawn takes, then what? The knight's missing. It's this fucking knight moves. I can't figure it out. Oh, wait a minute. What if, wait, why in the check. Oh, that's Let's double check. Why not move here? King moves and then it's mate. No, it's not mate. Because the knight can take that square. What about here? I don't know. I don't know what the move is. I'm gonna look for it, because I can't fucking find it. Oh, yeah.
Now it's forced mate in 2.
Is it really?
Now it's mate in 3 for black. Take your time, play the best move.
Why is it
Notice, of course, the black knight can move anywhere it wants to with discovered check, but there's only one way to force mate. Do you see it?
Here. 1. Here. No, I don't see it.
Good move. Knight h3 check. King h1. Now it's forced mate in 2. Take your time. What is it?
Now it's 2 moves? Oh, it's a smothered mate. There's the, he set up the smothered mate. I think, didn't he? It's gotta be that move.
Excellent work. A queen sacrifice.
I can't
Queen
see it.
g1 check. Very similar to what we just saw. The knight on h3 guards the queen on g1, so the king can't capture. But white's knight on f3 can take it.
That's
Knight takes
tricky.
g1, and now do you see the smothered mate? Knight f2, checkmate, and black wins the game. I actually went on to win this tournament. This was a very important tactic for me. Now, returning to the original position for a second, let's take a look. I just want you to notice that, of course, black couldn't initially play queen g1, because white can play king takes g1.
Right.
The whole idea of the initial 2 moves, knight f2 check, king g1, knight h3 check, was that after king h1, queen g1, the white knight has to capture, smothering its own king. Of course, after knight h3 double check, white could also have played king f1. Do you see the mate in 1 here?
Yeah.
It's a support mate. Queen f2. The knight on h3 also guards the f2 square, and black wins the game here. The reason I gave you the last exercise first is because you may have had more trouble with that one than with this one, even though this one was much more complicated. I want you to recognize the importance of learning patterns and then applying those patterns to other situations. Now for your last exercise, an extra challenge.
Oh boy.
This problem is really hard, and it involves thinking backwards. The first thing you should notice is that all of black's pieces are aiming at the king. You see the bishop on b7, the bishop on d6, the knight on d4, the queen on d7. They're all sweeping this way, towards the king's side. So you should immediately sense that there's a way for you to win here. Black can put these elements together to mate the white king. So when you see this type of situation, where all of the pieces are aiming at the king, your instincts should go off, your alarm bell should ring. There's a way to win here. Take your time. What do you see? It's very tempting in this type of situation to just run at the king, to try to play knight e2 check, or knight f3 check, or queen takes h3, sacrifice something, attack. A lot of people think that attacking chess is all about rushing forward, but it's not. Usually, to be successful against a strong opponent, an attack has to be very methodical. Here, there's one white piece, the knight on c3, which is guarding the e2 square, which turns out to be quite critical. With that in mind, find black's strongest idea.
Yeah, I was just seeing that. So if knight takes, if rook takes knight, and then there's knight check, there still isn't anything guarding, knight check, that moves, you move that queen. Let me think. I mean, the king's in there smothered. The knight can, there's check. That move is forced. If bishop captures check, capture is forced. But that pawn is still sitting there guarding the g3 square. So I don't see the mate. Wait a minute. Wait. It might be there with the knight. I think it's there with the knight, but I can't see it. So after bishop, no wait, if bishop captures pawn, I can't see that far ahead. Let's just 4 fucking moves. I used to be able to see 6 moves ahead. You said talking about working backwards. The problem is the F3, the F2 pawn's guarding the G3 square. I'd like to be able to put my queen on that square. Maybe it's too early. I know they're taking that knight's the right move. And then it has to be check. What about a queen sacrifice? No. Wait a minute. What about a queen sacrifice? That forces that. Oh, that pawn is pinned. Oh, I can see this one. That pawn is pinned. Once the king moves to that square, the queen can come right over and capture this pawn with impudence, or whatever the hell the fucking word is. And that might be mate.
Well done. The first move is a sacrifice. Rook takes c3. White plays queen takes c3. Now it's your turn. Forced mate in 2. Black to move.
1.
Very good. The idea of taking on c3 was to remove the defender of the e2 square. So black plays knight e2 check, king h1. Did you see the mate here? Here you use a pin. The g2 pawn, in fact, can't move because the bishop on b7 is now pinning it to the king on h1.
Yep.
So black can play queen takes h3 check. And in fact, that's not just check, it's mate.
Yep.
Black wins the game because of a fantastic pin. So this last problem involved sacrificing to remove the defender to open up a deadly pin to deliver checkmate. That's how we combine critical ideas to win chess games. Congratulations! Now you're in possession of a tactical foundation that you can build on for the rest of your chess playing days. Remember, these ideas we just studied are the building blocks of nearly every complex chess creation. As you grow as a chess player, you'll learn how to combine the very themes we just discussed to orchestrate beautiful, harmonious attacks. Now we're ready to enter the subtle world of chess strategy.
I didn't do this part here, because I'm assuming that most people know about these. This is a little bit more complicated. I did some of the art of learning, and he talks about some of his chess games. Now see, he's going into chess games here with pawn structure. This might be some good stuff to go through a little bit later. There's some annotated games. More pins, quality, the first master, compensation. Kingside weakness, little differences, space left behind, opponent's timing. Where is it says more pins? Why don't we do that? I don't know how long that is.
One of the most enticing things to do as a chess player is to learn the opening. To spend most of your time studying the opening, studying known variations, working on traps, figuring out new ideas of your own so that you can get people without even having to play a move, just to win by your knowledge alone. It's a very enticing thing to do. And often if you don't study the openings very much, what you'll notice is that you're trapped often. Somebody plays something against you that you haven't seen before. I really believe that it's a mistake to spend too much time studying the opening, because the opening isn't chess. It's memorization. The meat of chess, the truly beautiful part of chess, the enigma of the game, lies in the endgame, where the board is more empty, and things are about detachment more than they're about tactics and mathematics. If you study the endgame, you gain an understanding of the pieces. By studying a rook alone, you'll learn about the rook.
Right.
By studying the king, the pawns, you'll grow to understand, have a connection, have a relationship with those pieces.
Right.
And then when you come back and you play the middle games and openings, you'll have a much firmer sense for what you're dealing with. But sometimes it's good to work on an opening, and in this next game, which we're going to look at, I was playing against a master named Todd Luna. The game was held in Centenary College in early 1996. The time control in this game was game 60. We had only 60 minutes to make all the moves. And I played an opening which is a pretty novel one, something that I've worked out, in which I handle a certain type of position in a very unorthodox way. The opening was the French defense. E4, E6, D4, D5. The basic idea of the French is to challenge in the center right away. Usually a structure will come where eventually white plays with E5. And so he has a slight spatial advantage. Black will play with C5, C3, try to undermine the base of the pawn chain. With knight C6, queen B6, try to hit the D4 pawn. White will defend that pawn and slowly build up castle kingside and try to build up a kingside attack while maintaining the structural solidity. But I chose a different plan. I developed this opening actually with my friend Maurice Ashley a number of years ago. It's a very interesting response to the French defense, which is also stylistically uncomfortable for players who play the French. And you have to always think about the psychological reality of the game. People who play the French defense are usually guys who like slow positional games in which they have a clear plan of counterattack on the queen side in the French defense. But I played e takes d5, e takes d5, c4. And immediately he's thrown off of his plan. The game is suddenly open instead of closed. And French players usually like closed games. And also, the game is not of the nature that a French player would usually like, which is very important. And I often will think about the feeling, the psychological moment of my opponent and respond to that. And so this opening tends to be uncomfortable for French players. The idea is that we're going to eventually move into a position of the isolated d-pawn. If you take off black's d and white's c pawns, you'll see that white is left with an isolated pawn. A pawn that has no one next to it, meaning there's no white e-pawn or white c-pawn. And it's on an open file, so eventually it could be attacked, rather forcefully. The basic plans in the isolated pawn positions are for black, the player in this game who's playing against it, to occupy the d5 square, which is a real hole. White can't control that square. So say black puts a knight on d5 and another knight on f6. He'll usually put his pawn on c7 to c6 to further his control of the d5 square. He'll have his bishop on e7 probably and castle kingside. Black's plan will generally be to trade off material as much as possible, because to trade down when your opponent has a structural weakness can usually help you take advantage of that weakness later on. White, on the other hand, doesn't want to trade down. White wants to put a knight on e5, a bishop on d3. He wants to be castled kingside. He wants to probably have a bishop on g5 and a knight on c3, and he wants to begin a build-up on the kingside. White's play is based upon kingside pressure. Black's play is based upon the d5 square and an eventual endgame advantage he's hoping for. I personally very much enjoy playing with the isolated pawn. And in this opening, and in this game, I played a plan which is rather unique against the isolated pawn. The isolated pawn is traditionally considered to be a weakness, and often people have a stereotype of the isolated pawn as a weakness, but I don't consider it to be a very real weakness. And very strong players understand that often, even if everything goes against the isolated pawn, it's still not so bad. Still, your advantage is only slightly worse if you reach an endgame in which all that's left is the isolated pawn and, say, bishops or knights. The position is often still defendable. But with the isolated pawn, you get the potential for a very big attack. You get to eventually, you build up your position and head for the enemy king. It's a very exciting game because the position begins from a very basic structural imbalance, which leads to an eventual dynamic, which can be very exciting to play with. And so the idea of the exchange French that I play with c4 is, after he played knight f6, knight c3, bishop e7, my plan is to put my bishop on d3 and my knight from g to e2, which is very different from how people usually play it. Usually white will put the knight, as I mentioned, from f3 to e5, take advantage of that square. So white will usually take the e5 square and give the d5 square.
I like knight e2.
My plan is different. The way I play it is I challenge his d5 square with a knight on f4, and I play against his bishop on c8. This is the main theme of this opening, playing against the light squared bishop of black. We'll see that later on. After bishop d3, he played d takes c4 to move into the structure. You can notice also that, of course, he could have played d takes c4 when my bishop was still on f1. but he would lose a tempo. You have to take advantage of every little thing. I couldn't play the plan of bishop d3 and knight ge2 without moving my bishop first, so I had to play bishop d3. So I give up a tempo to reach the plan that I want. Bishop d3, d takes c4, bishop takes c4, castles, knight ge2, my plan. Black plays knight bd7, a classical idea. He wants to put his knight on b6, he wants to play c6, occupy the d5 square. He's not really sure what I'm doing yet. I castle, he plays knight b6, bishop b3, and he plays the move c7 to c6. His point being, he wants to further his control of d5 before he comes there. c6 is the correct move. In this position, I play rook f1 to e1, which is a very important move. It's a waiting move in a sense. I'm waiting for black to show his plan. He has two possibilities. He can either occupy the d5 square right away, or wait before doing it. The only way to wait before doing it, really, is to move his c8 bishop. The key to my plan with white is that I'm playing against the movements of his light-squared bishop, which we'll see later in this game and in the following game against Aviv Friedman. Let's take a moment and try to understand what happens if he plays knight b to d5, takes the square right away. My plan is to play knight f4, attack the piece. Suddenly we see that I've handled this opening differently from how people usually handle the positions of the isolated pawn. I have a threat. Because of my rook on e1, suddenly exposing an attack onto the e7 bishop. My threat is to trade on d5 many times. If you imagine if it's white's move or if black, say, plays bishop f5, I'm threatening knight takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, c takes d5, bishop takes d5. After black plays queen takes d5, he's left his bishop on e7 unguarded, and I take it, and I've won a pawn. So by playing knight f4, I'm threatening a pawn, and he has to decide how to defend against it. If he takes on c3, I play b takes c3, and I no longer have the isolated pawn. And I do have a very strong center, and we'll slowly build up my position. White is clearly better here. By responding to my threat on the d5 square, he gave up my weakness, or my potential weakness, of the isolated pawn. And his final option is to take on f4. Then I take back with my bishop. He's helped me to develop. And you notice that his main plan of controlling the d5 square against the isolated pawn is no longer possible. Can't do it. I control the d5 square. I'm even threatening to play d4 to d5, to trade off pawns and to take an active position in a symmetrical pawn structure. My pieces are more active than his. Notice that if he plays knight f6 to d5, I can still take the pawn. His bishop on e7 is undefended. And one final thing that you should notice is if black manages to play knight takes d5 and I can't take the pawn, or I choose not to, knight takes d5, c takes d5. Look at the position where
the bishop on e7,
it's exactly symmetrical pawn structure.
He made a mistake there.
Except I play queen f3, and the only way for him to defend the d5 pawn is play bishop e6. In this position, with the pawn structure exactly the same, white is better. Because I have an active bishop on b3, and he has a passive bishop on e6. My pieces are more active, and he has a big target on d5. White has a clear advantage here. This is the basic idea of my opening. I've had tremendous success with it over the years. In this game, my opponent chose not to occupy the d5 square right away, but to play bishop to g4, which seems like a good place for the bishop. But I challenge it, f2 to f3, breaking the pin on my knight on e2 and attacking the piece. Now a question is put to the bishop where to go. If bishop h5, I can play knight f4, attacking the piece and winning it eventually. Bishop comes back to g6. I can take on g6, and after h takes g6, you see that this pawn on g6 is very weak, because you remember from the last game, the pawn on f7 is really pinned. He's lost his light-squared bishop, which means my light squares will be very strong. And eventually I'm going to build up a big attack and maybe win the g6 pawn. It's very important also to understand that when a bishop goes, the counterpart to that bishop becomes stronger. If he loses his light-squared bishop, my light-squared bishop becomes stronger, because there's nothing for him to challenge it with. So, after I played f3, he played bishop back to f5. I challenged the bishop again, knight to g3. This is all the idea of the opening. Where can the bishop go? he really has two options. He can come to g6, or he can come to d7. Bishop e6 is obviously very bad. He just loses a pawn on e6. It's attacked twice and defended once. If the bishop comes back to g6, I play the idea f3 to f4. A kind of strange idea at first. My threat is to play f5 and win the bishop on g6. This position we'll analyze in the next game against Aviv Friedman. We in fact had this exact position through a slightly different move order. Luna decided something else. He played bishop back to d7. And you already feel the nature of what I've done. The power of what I've done. His two bishops are ridiculous. On e7 and d7 they do nothing but block the activity of his own queen. His pieces are completely unharmonious. And I'm ready now to slowly build up my game. Also notice that his bishop on d7 blocks the queen's control of the d5 square. But now my plan is going to be different. I'm going to attack on the king side. I played the move queen d1 to d3. You know by now which way I like to go. My queen is on the h7 square. Eventually that'll become very important maybe. He has to figure out what to do. My rook on e1 has a potential attack on the e7 square. The bishop is only defended by his queen. It's very important to feel the nature of potential in chess. This is something which can bother him a little bit. He has to worry about it. He decided to alleviate that pressure by playing rook f8 to e8. And now, by playing rook to e8, remember what he left behind. The f7 square. He defended the e7 square, but left something. The f7 square will become weaker a little later on. I played the move bishop c1 to g5. This move is useful for a number of reasons. For one thing, it helps to take away the defender of the h7 square. My plan once again will be bishop b3 to c2 on the h7 square, threatening bishop takes f6 and queen takes h7 with an eventual checkmate. The other idea is if he was planning on moving his bishop on e7, he can't do that anymore because he's going to be suddenly afraid of a pin on the knight on f6. Very uncomfortable. If his bishop moves anywhere, f8 or d6, I can play knight c to e4, and his knight on f6 is in big trouble. I'm going to take it and mess up his pawn structure. He couldn't deal with the pressure on his king side, and he played h7 to h6. His best move would be to play knight f to d5 to try to alleviate the pressure. And once again, it comes back to defending correctly in chess.
The pressure is a common
It's very, very important to maintain a cool head when you're being attacked. Knight f6 to d5 is a very hard move to make because what you're doing is you're leaving the king side. But this is something which often is very important to do. When you're being attacked on the king side, it's very hard to move your only defensive piece away from the king side. But if you calculate that you can do it, then sometimes it's alright. Let's try to understand the move, knight f6 to d5. Your initial reaction may be, what kind of terrible move is that? I agree, it looks pretty bad. But what is the sense behind it? He wants to trade off his bishop on e7 for my bishop on g5. That's his idea. Remember, black wants to trade down pieces when he has the isolated pawn. But his knight on f6 has left the h7 square, has it not? So should I play bishop to c2 maybe? If I play bishop to c2, I'm threatening checkmate. Queen takes h7 check, king f8, queen h8 checkmate. If he takes my bishop on g5, it's still mate because my rook guards the e7 square. He really has only one move, g7 to g6. Now I would play bishop g5 to h6 probably, avoiding a trade. I probably don't want to trade down, right? Because he has the isolated pawn. Bishop h6. And now in this position, white is slightly better. I'm going to take a piece to e4 now. Maybe I can bring a piece to c5. Take advantage of his dark squares. White is slightly better, but black is still alive. The way to defend is to maintain a clear head. If when you're attacked, you feel the heat of the battle, you feel the heat of the pressure, and you get nervous and you fall under that heat, then you have no way of ever succeeding. You need to have the ability to maintain clarity when under pressure. And here I use the tactic which I used in the last game. And the reason I'm showing these first two games is because I want you to learn the theme of the pinned defender, because it'll come in handy in all of your games in the future, and it also will come in handy in the games which we'll look at later on. After h6, what do you think I played?
The knight move.
I took it. Bishop takes h6. G takes h6, and I know you know the move by now. Queen g6 check. The pawn on f7 is pinned. There's nothing he can do. His king side looked solid a moment ago. His pawns were on f7, g7, and h7. but he couldn't deal with my pieces which were near his king side. He played h6, I took it, and suddenly my queen is breathing on him. His king is getting roasted slowly. If he plays king f8 as mate in 1, queen takes f7, checkmate. His only move is king h8. And now you have a real good position. You've sacrificed a piece for a big attack, your queen is inside his king position, but now you have to play the correct moves, because one mistake in chess can often be fatal. And when you're better, when you're attacking, your opponent's resources are very real. They're there. He's looking for them. You just can't allow them. You have to win the one game correctly. What should you do? If queen takes h6 check, which is the most tempting move,
That's too slow.
black will play knight back to h7. If bishop c2, threatening checkmate on h7, he can block that diagonal by playing f7 to f5, and now you suddenly notice that white's attacking pieces are slowly growing thin.
Well, I could move the
Next
knight
move,
out.
maybe bishop e7 to g5, attacking the queen on h6. Queen on d8 can come to f6 soon. Black is defending. Check is not mate, my friend. You don't want to take a pawn with check whenever you can. Often you need to look for the best move. Queen takes h6 will be an immediate threat to the king, but it would not be the best move because it allows black chances to defend. I played bishop b3 takes f7, bringing another piece into the attack. I maintained the threat of queen takes h6. Often it's very important to maintain the threat. The threat is often stronger than the execution in chess. The reality for black of having to defend against 2 or 3 things can make the attack devastating, while if I seize onto one of those 3 things which he needs to defend against, he'll simply respond and not have to worry about anything anymore. What does black have to worry about here? My immediate threat is queen takes h6 check. Knight will come back to h7, I'll play bishop back to g6, threatening the pinned defender. There's nothing he can do, and that'll be mate. How can he defend the h6 square? Bishop e7 to f8 is a logical move. But I saw when I played bishop takes h6 actually, that in this position, I have a winning move. What did the bishop coming back to f8 leave?
Rook captures rook.
What does he not control that he controlled last move?
Well,
You remember that question from before.
that
He now controls the h6 square, but he's blocked the defense of the g8 square. The rook on e8 no longer controls the g8 square.
okay, so what
And
about
also
the
he's given up a little bit of control of the f6 square. What is my move?
knight h.
Knight on g3 to h5.
Yep.
Wins the game. If he trades rooks on e1, it makes no difference. If he plays knight takes h5, queen g8 is checkmate. If he plays bishop on f8 to g7, queen takes g7 is checkmate. If bishop on f8 to e7, queen to g7 is checkmate. There's no way for him to guard the knight on
There's some more
f6.
moves
My
left,
threat
though.
is simply knight takes f6. And to defend all the different mates. He's lost. He played the move knight b to d5. His idea being, after I play queen takes h6 check,
That's not going to do any good. Just
knight
take,
to h7,
Just take the defender off.
bishop to g6, threatening queen takes h7
Knight
checkmate,
captures
to
knight.
play knight d5 to f6, bringing back another piece, all the way from the queen side back to the king side. Now he's actually succeeded in defending the h7 knight. That's what his idea is.
That's just delaying.
How do you
the
stop
mate.
that idea?
You just take the knight away.
His defense is hanging on by a thread, but in fact it's not strong enough.
Just take the knight away.
My knight on c3 isn't really doing anything, and his knight on d5, as we just said, is a very important defensive piece. I just play knight c3, takes d5.
Yep.
If it takes back with the knight, queen takes h6 is checkmate right away. His only move is c takes d5. I play queen takes h6 check, only move knight h7. By now you know what to do with the pinned piece. Attack it. Bishop f7 to g6. There's no way to defend mate in 2. If he plays king g8, I play queen takes h7 check, king f8.
Wow.
There are 2 ways to roast him. Queen h8 mate and queen f7 mate. The party's over. And he resigned.
There was something back in the back of ways on this about where he moved a pawn and a bishop at the same time. I've got to go back and look at the stream and find out about that. So that wasn't too bad. I mean, let's X out of that. I mean, I think the instruction was pretty good. I think the the forks, the knight forks, the skewers, the pins, removing the defender, discovered attacks, like discovered checks, discovered attack on something with a piece attack on a queen or some lower or some other piece. Trying to think. There's a terminology called deflection, which is sort of like removing the defender, or like there was a move back there when the rook came down and made check with the king and caused the king to move over. That's like a deflection. It's a skewer, but it's not really a skewer because the skewer isn't able to take effect. It's a deflection because that's what the end result is. He's deflected the king off of a square so that the fork could be created. So I think that's a little bit improper terminology in some of those cases. That's the story of that. Now, as far as openings, I really can't get into the openings. Maybe there's an endgame course. We could probably do that in a different stream. As far as openings, there is, I don't know, what is this? Oh, there's supposed to be, see, this is Chess Master, and I'm using Chess Master to go, we can go over some of this stuff, arsenal, strategy, tactics, that sort of thing. I think that's good. It's a little bit more in depth than I wanted to get into. I like the idea that I've got to try to think of the moves, and I had some problems with them. But I was trying to look from the black's point of view, which is extremely difficult. It might be easier to figure those things out when you're playing over the board,